Hey, welcome to Modern Day Debate. Very excited to have you here, as today we are discussing whether or not atheists and Christians can be friends. And we're starting right now. So, very glad to have you here. As mentioned, a discussion on whether or not atheists and Christians can be friends. And I am just honored to have, this is our first time that we get to have Objectively Dan. So Dan, I want to say thanks so much for coming on.
Woo! Thank you. It's quite a pleasure.
Thank you, my pleasure. And so also we get to have Suris back. Thanks for coming back on, Suris. Good to see you.
No problem. How's it going?
Oh, it's going excellent. I'm stoked. This is honestly like the highlight of my day. It gives me energy and I get excited. And so we have also first timer here. This is Craig. We've gotten to chat a lot on Twitter, but Craig, I want to say thank you for coming on, Craig. And Craig, I noticed in your camera, like, you stood incredibly still this whole time so far. You haven't even blinked. That's incredible.
That's a skill that I possess when I'm actually not on camera. It's
That's
really
awesome.
amazing like that.
But I'm glad to have you here, Craig.
Yeah, happy to be here. This is great. This is fun.
Thank you for dealing with my corny joke. Whenever we put a picture up, I always make that joke. It never gets old for me. So basically, this is going to be a blast because I'm really thrilled to get your guys' ideas on this. Like, oh, if you guys want to hear my ideas, like, I'll pitch in and, you know, share. But I think you're probably going to have more insightful, interesting stuff to share. And so I'm going to be fairly quiet unless you ask. And I'm going to just start it out with a controversial little debate that we have coming up soon. And by that I mean I want you guys to give me your opinion on this. We're hoping that this debate happens next week, and I want to know if you guys think this is going to be bad. So you're going to see it in a second. Basically, the audience can see it, and you're going to see it on the YouTube page. Basically, it's called, "Is Internet Atheism a Hate Cult?" And it's actually going to be two guests.
Oh, and I see the guests. Oh, that's
who are the
interesting.
It's going to be a controversial debate. I'm not trying to stir the pot. Like,
oh, sure.
Okay, let me just
I
go
believe
ahead
you.
and say that you say you're not trying to stir the pot, James, but I've seen some of the guests on your channel. I don't believe you.
Oh. So you're talking about Kent Hovind, or?
Can I just answer with yes and point to multiple episodes?
Oh my goodness, yes. You know, Kent Hovind's been a friend of the channel. I really get along with Kent. But anyway, okay, I digress. You guys, is the roof gonna blow off? I mean, my guess is probably at least two of you don't think that internet atheism is a hate cult.
I would say probably all three of us do, at least in some form or fashion.
Who are the two guests?
Yeah, which two do you think don't think that?
Wait a minute. Wait, you're saying that you think that there's some truth to it, or you're saying?
I'm saying that it has the capacity. I wouldn't use the first contention that I would have is just using the word cult in general, because if we want to do a broad brushstroke thing for atheism, saying that it's a cult, then as soon as we do that, then I can then do a broad brushstroke and say that all religions are a cult. But I would never say that. I have no issue doing it in a reactionary sense, though. A cult, usually you would juxtapose it with something like the bite model, and that would let you know whether something actually is a cult or not. So maybe saying like a hate group might be better because a group has less baggage.
Right.
But using the word cult has baggage and the association of not just taking, like, if somebody wants to say, here's this dictionary definition of cult and you loosely fit into here, that person can kindly screw off, because I don't think there's a single psychological evaluation that says the dictionary says this. They would usually refer to a specialized source, like the DSM-5. So I would refer to a specialized source for cults, which would be something like the bite model. So yeah, my only contention is just saying the word cult there. But I'm fine if somebody says group, then I would say that yes, there's a potential for that, and there might have been a point in time where that was the case for the atheist community, because I know that there was a point in time where there was a very like hardline anti-Christian narrative for a decent chunk of the atheist community, whereas now there seems to be a more like work. Even some of your harder anti-theists are still more like, let's work together, let's see how this works. But I do think at one point on YouTube that wasn't necessarily the case.
So
yeah, I was going to say.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So, Genetically Modified Skeptic just did a video about this like a day ago, and he examined the atheist community of Austin, which is what I'm a part of, and examined whether or not they were a cult using the bite model, and he basically got a 0. Like, they didn't really follow that at all. So I agree with Suris that the technical definition, really, you have to look at that first, and of course we would totally disagree with that. As a pejorative, like, do we follow certain ideological tendencies? I mean, there's more of an argument to be made there, but we don't have any organized set of tenets or rules or anything. We just kind of had these cultural norms and other kinds of social agreements that we all just kind of came to independently. And by the way, we're very contentious. It's very hard to get two non-believers to agree on a lot of other different topics. So I would say, if we're a hate group, I mean, there are definitely certain targets, sure, but there's a broad category of things you could look at as far as what we actually believe and what our, quote unquote ideologies really are.
Wow, I am so surprised. I thought you guys were going to be way more
inflammatory.
Yeah, I thought that. I mean, I'm not like trying to push the idea. I would say I don't think it's true. I think they're definitely. I mean, well, I want to hear your thoughts, Craig. But
okay, so this is when you ask Suris a question, and actually it's pretty much true of Dan too, but it's really obvious with Suris, you're going to get a measured, nuanced response, and his response is actually really on point, because if you're talking about the standard definition of a cult, no. Like both of them mentioned the bite model, and actually Drew's video goes into the bite model, but it depends on who's arguing that it's a hate cult. If they argue it colloquial, that some people in the atheist community can be cult-like, can be too hateful.
Yeah, that's fine.
Right. Then they can make a case, and like Suris said, the case would be, especially like 5-10 years ago, where they would pile on a Christian channel and just like trash them and stuff, which I don't think happens as much anymore. Maybe it does.
It's for some smaller groups it does, because I know that I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus, but there's one person who added me on Facebook like 8-ish months ago, and that's basically what he does. Is like, if a pastor goes live on Facebook, he grabs a bunch of his friends and they all go in and they start just like basically just trash talking. And he invited me in for one instance of that, and then afterwards I'm just like, that's not really what I want to do. I'd rather like go on live and talk to that pastor live and actually have a conversation, not just sit there and fling my hands angrily in the comment section. I don't think that's very useful.
Right.
So yeah, there are still some people who do that nowadays. It's a lot harder to find it. I think just people got tired of seeing it, so it's just not something that gets promoted a lot anymore.
Wow.
I agree.
That's okay. You guys, well, I appreciate you guys are impressively authentic and willing to say, like, yeah, there's some people on our side. The same way that I would say, yeah, there are plenty of people who identify as Christian and who are filled with hate. Right. I think that, like, well, here's an interesting idea. I mean, depending on what your guys, we'll go back to the main issue, namely the question of the debate. What are, or I should say discussion, sorry, habit, is what are the things that maybe help or harm Christians and atheists from being friends? Like, what are the things that slow it down? Are there scientific explanations for why it's not easy to pull off? Or maybe you guys have examples. Maybe you guys are like, no, actually, I think there's some really good examples.
I mean, I could go with an example that happened on your channel. This was not a thing that you did, James, but it was a guest that you had on earlier. And I'll go ahead and say it because it's not going to sound it's not going to sound strange to any longtime viewers of any of this type of content. But it was a thing Nephilim Free said at one point. And I think that the rhetoric that he used in this statement, and if anybody wants to go back and find the video, it's on both mine and James's channel, just to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting Nephi. One of the things that he said was when I pointed out that an atheist can have a moral framework. Not all atheists have to be moral nihilists. And then he immediately said that, well, that would be inconsistent. That would be inconsistent. And it's like, don't The first thing that I would say is it would be best if people from both camps didn't fall into this trap of trying to tell each other how they're supposed to think. So, for instance, if a Christian tells me that I have to be a moral nihilist because I'm an atheist, well, no, I don't, and I've probably read more pages of philosophy on this than that person has if they try to make that argument. And then an atheist should not then say, well, a Christian thinks that everybody else should have to burn in hell. Well, no, not necessarily. There are some Christians that are annihilationists that have read the Bible and realize that the Bible is incredibly vague on the idea of hell. Now, do we have a very loud and vocal evangelical sect, especially here in the United States, that claims hellfire in all of its the Apocalypse of Peter and Dante's Inferno stylings? Yes, we do. We've seen them a lot. I grew up in one of these sects of Christianity. But not all Christians are that way, and not all atheists are, as Nephi tried to paint, moral nihilists. In fact, most of them I've seen are nowhere near that. So maybe just not trying to paint each other with broad brushes and not trying to tell each other what we have to think. I think that's probably the first step to actually having friendships come through these different communities.
Interesting. Dan, you look like you got something to say.
Yeah, I would say I just don't like it, and it's very common, and I did the same thing when I was a believer. When I was talking to non-believers, I always held the assumption, oh, if only they saw the things that I saw, or if only they read this certain passage or knew about this book or something, then they would know. And you kind of get this attitude sometimes when you talk to people about this, and they don't realize the level of depth and research that I've come to this conclusion. In fact, it was in the process of me getting more invested in my own faith, in my Christian faith, that I came to the conclusions that I did. And I still read all kinds. I just finished reading some of Bart Ehrman's book, Forged, which is a book on, he's a biblical scholar who talks about some of the early Christian writings and stuff. Like, I'm very much interested in Christian culture in particular and Christian history, and it's actually a big hobby horse of mine. And for somebody to just come up to me and assume, because I don't believe in it, that I necessarily haven't done the same research as them or have not attained the same, intellectual ascent as they have, is a little bit frustrating, I guess, because, you don't know my story, you don't know where I'm at. And also just the idea that I came to this conclusion because something hurt me, or there was some sort of problems in my past, or, making these kinds of ties to something that wasn't really there, or wasn't really why I made the conclusions that I did. In the same way that I wouldn't want a Christian to be like, oh, well, you just believe because, your grandmother had cancer and it gave you, some sort of hope to cling on to. Like, I think that's really disrespectful, and honestly, it doesn't help with the conversation.
Yeah, so kind of, it sounds like you're saying maybe that they think they've kind of got you figured out. They're a little bit presumptuous, right?
Like, oh, you just need to read Frank Turek's, like, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist or something, and you'll get it. It's like, oh yeah, I've actually read that. I've read some of these other texts and stuff. Like, I'm there. I'm with you.
And then the moving of whichever book you need to read. Oh, you should read Cold Case Christianity. I just did a whole review on that book. Don't even. Yeah, Craig.
The other thing I was going to say, off of what Dan said, is you can be friends with atheists and you can be friends with people who have opposing ideologies if you aren't so rigid in your position that you can allow them to hang out with you without you having to impose your beliefs on them every minute of the conversation. The example that Suris said about Nephilim was also an example of, it's the first trap you fall into is you're presumptuous. You make assumptions about what the other person believes. But the other thing that people do, if you work with like an atheist, you might even be good intending, like, oh, you should read this book. Oh, you thinking you're going to say the next thing that's going to win them over to the Lord. You might even have good intentions, but what you're actually doing is kind of imposing your worldview on them and not letting them just kind of be and hang out with you and just have those conversations come up organically, which is a big mistake that people make on both sides. Neither of these two particularly do it, but it's done. And atheists can do it too. Like, they won't let you not, they'll make you answer for Christianity the entire time you're talking for them. Like, shut up. I don't want to. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I appreciate your guys' humility and, like I said, authenticity. And this has been already really illuminating. Not that I didn't expect it, because, you know, that's why, Dan, I haven't got to talk to you before, but I can tell you have an authentic, you know, you seem a lot of honest kind of, like, hey, it's true that there's some of this stuff like this. And Suris, we've talked before, so I've seen you kind of be willing to say, like, yeah, there's some crap that goes on. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm curious. Go ahead, Dan. Did you have something? Oh, sorry. I thought, okay, trying to read your mind again. Sorry, presumptuous, but okay.
How dare you?
If we think about, like, let's say the scientific explanation, so some would say that, like, humans, like, from our tribal past, that we are evolutionarily wired, or whatever way you want to say it. So especially, like, as an atheist, if you think that there's no theist God that would, like a God that would step in to kind of ensure that the wiring doesn't go this way. Although the Christian has, like, a similar problem, that the Christian would say there's this fallen nature we have. And likewise, a secularist might say, well, we might think that we evolved in such a way that we were in groups, and now we have this insider-outsider type of view that makes it very difficult for us to get along. Do you think that there is, like, some sort of scientific basis for any of these beliefs?
Well,
absolutely.
There certainly is. If you're and I think you can, like, for instance, I think Cy Gard is a wonderful example of this. For anybody who's familiar with Cy, you can understand those that social evolution, or just evolution in general, while being a theist. The idea that, oh, it's just a secularist argument that we would use evolution is kind of a misnomer, because that's a trying to remember, early 1900s is when the young Earth creationism movement really tried to start hammering out evolution for some weird reason, because apparently that's the one science that makes them scared. You can have a theist argue that as well, like how Craig literally just agreed that there's definitely an evolutionary reason to have in and out group things. And we know through modern psychology now, so that is a very newer science, because it's not a thing that we really had the ability to do before, at least not in the way we do now. We know now that there's schemas that people develop that help them ascertain who might be in the in group or who might be in the out group. And we know that we developed those because we find ourselves in a situation where we have to make split-second decisions about individuals all the time. For instance, James, if I didn't know about your channel and you asked me, hey, do you want to come on my channel here in 2 hours, as an example, I don't have time to go through all of your content to determine whether or not you're somebody I want to deal with. I can only assemble a very quick model of you in my mind, which is a schema, to determine whether or not it's a channel that I want to hop onto. That's a thing we've evolved to do because we don't have time to look at 10 years of Kent Hovind seminars to determine whether or not we think he's a good or a bad person. We don't have time to go through 5 years and several books of Sam Harris's in order to determine whether or not we like him and his arguments. That's not a thing that we've evolved to do, and it's a thing that we can do, but we have to be so selective with who we can do it. We don't have the time, which is why schema development is a time-sensitive thing. So I don't think there's really an argument that it's not a thing that we have. I think it's pretty much a guaranteed. We've developed this in and out group thing because it's a matter of being able to make quicker, snappier decisions.
Along with that comes, there's a mental shorthand involved with tribal identity, and that's part of why it persists even in today's world. People do it with every single solitary tribe that they're a part of. Democrats do it with Republicans. Republicans do it with Democrats. You make a mental shorthand, and there are certain cues. Like, it's more or less like a flag. He doesn't have time to investigate, okay, James is a good Christian, or James is a Christian who's reasonable. He's just looking, like, the first thing you see is the flag, the tribal identity, and you make a mental shorthand based on that tribal identity. Now, everybody does it to one degree or another, but some of us, like these two, for example, are much better at putting it aside for like just hanging out with somebody. There's a lot of, everybody does it, and everybody to some degree feels more comfortable in their tribe. But some of us, like, I've always prided myself on being able to float in and out of different cliques and different groups and read them pretty quickly. When you can put aside those things and just hang out with somebody, just experiencing them one-on-one, you know, you put aside your preconceived notions and your biases, then yes, then you can basically be friends with anybody, I think.
Yeah, so this actually goes into my field of study a little bit. I have a background in communication studies. I just graduated college last month, so
Congrats.
But there is this idea of people coding for the situations that come up in their life. And what I mean by coding is a gay person can code as a straight person, meaning like they can be involved with the groups of straight people doing straight people things, and they can pass as a straight person, no problem. And that's why people who think, oh, I don't know anybody is gay, well, you definitely do know somebody is gay who probably isn't comfortable talking about themselves. And so the identity of what a gay person is to them can kind of just, if it's just informed from media and it's just informed from these kind of pejorative interpretations, that's going to skew how other people view people outside of, you know, their, shall I say normal group, so I should normal interactions with people, even if they actually know somebody who doesn't fit that norm. In the same way as an atheist, and Suris can attest to this as well, I can code as a Christian. I can pretend that I'm still a Christian. I can go around and nobody will know the difference because most people I talk to are going to be Christians. In fact, I've had encounters with people when I told them I was an atheist. They're like, "Oh, you seem so nice. I didn't really understand."
Not every atheist is TJ Kirk.
Yeah, it goes against their norms in their head of how this operates. So it's easy to see how these kinds of stereotypes can easily develop in groups and out-groups. And there's, especially in you know, America in 2019, how we handle these things. It's kind of breaking down a little bit more because now we have the internet, now we have people being more out about this stuff and being more public about these things. Those are kind of breaking down a little bit, but also kind of creating worse echo chambers and stuff, which is a whole other debate topic, but pretty fascinating.
Yeah, that is. So I'm glad you shared that, and it made me think suddenly of this. You guys are gonna maybe be surprised to hear this, and I'm not doing it to try to like throw anybody under the bus, okay? Can you promise not to judge me? Promise that you'll believe me? Suris knows what's coming. No, okay. So there's an interesting study that showed that you guys all probably know it, that religious people have a bias against atheists. So we see this like across America. There's kind of like a, you know, America's primarily religious, like maybe 70, maybe even 70 to 90% identify with some sort of organized religion, even if they don't go to church or temple. So with that, that's probably not too surprising for you, but they even found that atheists have a bias against atheists. In other words, atheists, and now you might explain this in different ways. I can think of two ways to explain it, and one of them is much more friendly toward atheists, and one of them is like pretty harsh on atheists. I'm curious about your guys' thoughts. Go ahead, Craig. I think you were saying something. Sorry about that.
I just said, It's like,
okay.
Those fighting words. I think there's I don't know. There's a double-edged sword with being a Christian, and there's the popular. This is related. It's going off of what you said. It just might not sound like it at first. There's in the popular imagination. There's a double-edged sword with being a Christian. There's an automatic assumptions that people make when they hear you're a Christian. Some of those are immediately negative. They think you're homophobic. They think you're anti-science. Those type of things. Others are immediately positive. You're probably more likely to get hired. They think you're not going to steal. They think you're going to be more honest. Same idea with the atheists to a degree, except the positives are only within like people who are leaning towards sympathy towards the atheist community, partially because of exposure, partially because they're kind of secularists themselves, or nons, or anti-religious themselves. But there was same idea on the ethics front. There'd be a kind of, I mean, it's rooted in a bias, to be quite honest. But let's say you're applying for a job, and I don't think they can ask you, but you would be remiss to mention that you're an atheist in the job application, or while you're being interviewed, because that would plant in a lot of people immediate assumptions. That's what I think. Now, are those assumptions based any degree in reality? I don't know.
It depends.
Go ahead.
I think whether or not they're based in reality depends. So, for instance, if the only atheist you've ever seen is T.J. Kirk, you've seen the times he was on, or David Silverman, as another example. There's a pretty negative view on atheism because of those two individuals and their public media appearances. So, by seeing them, any assumption that you have about atheist is going to be rooted in reality, because it's rooted in a real person who is a representation of that in your mind. Just like for me, if the only Christians I've ever been introduced to are Steven Anderson, Matt Powell, Kent Hovind, the model in my mind of a Christian is accurate to those Christians because I've seen those Christians. They are real people that I can build that model in my mind with. The problem is whether or not the model represents any version of reality, because there's a version of reality where Hovind exists, of course. The issue is whether or not we can then take that and then paint with a broad brush as a result. Just like if the only Christians that I had ever met were people like you, Craig, or James, then I would have met mostly reasonable Christians who are very good at public discourse and they want to have those types of conversations. If those are the only Christians that I met, then I might say something, which I actually did a video on somebody who said this exact thing. I might say something like, there is no church that has ever said anything homophobic. I might say something like that if the only Christians I've been introduced to were calm, reasonable, kind ones. But we know for a fact that those aren't the only Christians that exist, just like we know for a fact that calm, reasonable, kind atheists aren't the only atheists that exist.
I agree.
I think I'm not sure about which study you're referring to, but we also need to keep in mind that the way that surveys account for atheists can be very, very tricky and is notorious for being very hard to actually count, because there are, as we probably suspect, more atheists out there that just don't use the label atheist, and so that can kind of mess with people's ideas of why people use this label and stuff in the first place. I think it was it a Harvard study recently? I could be wrong. I got a more accurate study of how many people were actually atheists by putting out a questionnaire of a couple of different questions, like some of them saying, like, do you have a dog? Or did you go to high school? Or something like that. And then that was a control. And then the other test of the survey was they added one more question, which was, do you believe in God? And they took the average of the differences between what we would expect to find in a normal population versus that extra answer to kind of calculate how many of these people actually didn't believe in God. And our rates of who was actually atheists went up by like twice as many in like U.S. populations than what we originally thought. So it is kind of interesting to think about. My first question would be, because I don't know which source you're using, but my first question would be what definition of atheist are they using, and if it's matching what we might consider atheist, because again, people have different ideas. And
like, are they using religious, are all atheists religious nons, or are they talking about only philosophical atheists, or like what type of atheists are they really working with there?
Yeah.
Well, same thing with Christians. Just like if they interviewed 5 Catholics, 3 Baptists, 16 Pentecostals, and just going down the list of like multi-denominations, and they say, well, Christians generally have this, but at the same time there are groups within those Christian sects that don't think the other Christian sects are really Christians.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I could see there being some issues with the study there, only because when you generalize those groups like that, there are some Christians that are like so hard line thinking that Catholics aren't Christian, not even realizing that the minute that you say that Catholics aren't Christian, you've now made Islam the most dominant religion in the world by numbers alone. So,
or like if I wanted to know how homophobic Christians were or something, or what their thoughts were on gay people, but I only asked Southern Baptists or something, like I'm going to get a very different number than if I asked like Methodists, for example, so it doesn't surprise me that a survey might give an answer like that. But again, I haven't seen it. I don't know. I can't dispute it.
I think that it's like, there's a way in which you could. I was going to say there's two explanations. One is, like I said, pretty harsh on atheists. That would be like what some would think is like a more intuitive one, but I don't think it's actually. I don't think we have reason to believe it. I don't know of any empirical data. One would be that like atheists are actually, meaner, let's say, on average than other groups. That's, like I said, kind of a harsh way to interpret it, because you could also interpret it this way. It looked like you didn't like that interpretation. I don't blame you.
No, I mean, I don't dispute it. I don't know if it's right or wrong.
Well, yeah, like I said, I don't think it's like, I don't think there's empirical evidence that atheists are meaner. So my way of saying this is that it might be that in the same way that there are stereotypes of certain groups, like let's say there's a certain ethnic group that people say, oh, that group is, they're bad drivers, or they're lazy, or whatever.
Brown people bad, basically.
Right. So whatever it is, like, even though we don't have empirical data, theoretically, if you found that, here's actually an actual example. They asked kids, these were like young, 4 or 5 years old. They had white kids, they had black kids, and they asked the black kids, like, which doll would you rather play with? And not only were the white kids more likely to select the white-colored dolls, the Caucasian-looking dolls, but black kids were also more likely to do that as well. Now, is it because like black kids is there any reason to think that from this study that black people are like any worse than white people? Well, no, of course not. And it's more so that it's just like a cultural convention of like favoritism toward whites over blacks. And so likewise in this atheist study, it might just be that people have this legitimately unfair bias. And by legitimately, I mean like legitimate, like it's actually unfair to atheists. And that atheists, by being around them, pick up that same unfair bias just by convention. Because it's just true that there are a lot of things like beliefs or ideas that we just adopt because we hear over and over, even though they're not true. So that's, I think, one way of explaining it.
It's kind of similar to like, if you ask people about their views of Christians back circa like 1957, it would be almost routinely positive. People would think of like Bing Crosby and like Bob Hope Road movies and things like that. Then when you somewhere around like the early 70s, you start getting a much more negative view of Christianity entering popular culture with movies like Carrie. I don't know if any of you saw Carrie, but the mom is like famously religious fanatic. She's like hitting her daughter with the Bible and calling her breasts dirt mounds, and
which is basically what you get also for anybody who plays video games, and like the Binding of Isaac series is the same thing. That's what the mother is in that series as well.
Yeah. Right. So the popular imagination, nowadays, if there's a priest or a preacher in a movie, 67 times out of 100, he's going to be the bad guy. He's going to be hateful or homophobic or a molester.
Unless we're talking about like the movie Signs, because in the movie Signs, that entire movie is about how he reclaims his faith.
Right. No, not always, but yeah. It's becoming a stock figure. There isn't enough of a like popular. The atheism hasn't permeated the popular culture to the degree that there are implicit biases in just everyday people about atheists. Do they even know who Matt Dillahunty is? I doubt it. Do they know? They might know who some really famous public atheists are, but it's not like I could be wrong about this, but just my intuition tells me that the public idea, even the biases and pro or con of atheists, hasn't really completely formed yet. There are negative associations that some people automatically have about atheists, but those are usually taught in churches. Probably Suris heard them before he was an atheist. Probably so did Dan. Oh, atheists are like X and Y and Z. I growing up in a secular community, I didn't hear anything about atheists, ever. Nobody was like, oh, these atheists here and these people are atheists. Never came up, But there's plenty of talk about, the greedy preacher and stuff like that. So that's just anecdotal evidence, but there you have it.
One thing I would say, though, Craig, I think something to consider is most people who work in Hollywood, most people who are in the film industry are left-leaning, and people who are left-leaning tend to be, more critical towards religion, and that goes back for decades past. So it could be that these groups of people who may not represent as much as the mainstream opinion in America, maybe represent the opinion of their immediate culture, are making some of these movies and don't necessarily reflect the opinion of all Americans.
Right,
Again,
but they start to permeate to make, because I watched Carrie when I was 6, 7, 8 with my family in Maine. And that image of the hate-filled preacher stuck with that. Yes, I totally agree with you. But they start to, just like homosexuality has become a lot more tolerated lately, that's partially because of Hollywood's influence on America. So sometimes it's for good or ill. But I agree with you. But it starts to permeate the mass culture. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, because I think it's by that same token, there's a reason why a lot of the YouTube crowd is more familiar with your Matt Dillahunties, your TJ Kirks, and your other versions of atheism that people are used to, because when you're part of, especially if you're part of like the skeptic crowd, whether you just enjoy watching the content or you count yourself among those people, you're more likely to see those people, and so your idea of an atheist might be more what Matt Dillahunty is, and less more. It might be less of like what caused all the events in The Exorcist, as an example.
Right. Well, and also when you meet people individually, that's the best way to overcome biases altogether, because you meet, you start to find out that there's no such thing as a standard atheist. You got cool atheists like a Shannon or you two, and then you have dismal atheists like I won't even mention. You know what I'm saying? So you got like, when you meet people individually, that's the best way to overcome implicit biases, because the human being starts to counteract whatever you think. Like, I don't think you eat all that many babies, Suris. You eat a few.
Like 12
there. You're an atheist
every day?
Right. And you're not pure.
I only eat vegan babies, to be fair. So,
well, there you go.
Oh, same here. You want them grass-fed.
Yeah.
That's funny. I like that. It's I think I talked to a Christian just 2 days ago, and he was talking about how and I heard it once before. So I was at this is like back when I was on staff with Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and this is like, now, by the way, that ministry is usually like, this is very unusual. Like they're very kind, they're very warm, but we had a speaker one time who, at an event, he was like, just kind of, he said, man, to be an atheist, you just have to turn your brain off. And I was like, gosh, like if somebody said that about a Christian, like if an atheist is like, man, to be a Christian, you got to turn your brain off, I'd be like, that doesn't really like make me feel excited to be your friend or to want to listen to more of what you have to say. It just seems kind of condescending. And so I thought, why is this pastor?
You say the FCA is fine.
Well, hold on a second. We can talk about FCA. We can talk about FCA later, Dan.
I have some stories about that, but I won't get into it.
I know. I understand. I just want to stay on the topic. But I was basically trying to defend atheists in this case. I was basically trying to say that this guest speaker, I was like, man, why would you say that about atheists? Like, if any atheists were in the crowd, it would be like, geez.
The last person they're going to want to associate with now is you. And that I think that also highlights another problem, in that you're ignoring whatever upbringing people might have. So, for instance, if somebody's been brought up Christian, then them turning their brain off might just be them being where they're comfortable, which is as a Christian. But if somebody's grew up in a very secular society, them turning their brain off is probably going to be just comfortably being an atheist and not thinking about anything there. So to say that one group has to turn their brain off to be assumes so much about how they've grown up that it's like you're not just painting with broad brushes now. You're now just trying to say that I was raised a certain way, and you don't even, I mean, unless you've got some intel from the Patriot Act, I don't think you actually know that.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is fascinating. It's
a dual problem too, because not only was that guy being condescending towards atheists, so if any atheists in the audience, but he's actually teaching condescension towards atheists. As a Christian, we're supposed to be witnessing the gospel to people. They're supposed to see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. You're supposed to be at least a decent human being and nice, you know. So he's teaching condescension to the people in the audience, and they're gonna, now they meet the atheists at work, they're not gonna be cool to them. They're gonna be, oh, you're one of those people who shut your brain off. You know, it's totally the wrong approach, and a lot of it is from defensiveness. You know, the pastor is unnecessarily triggered out about atheists because he's defensive. You know, they kind of represent a rebuke to his worldview more than they should. He's taking it too personally. That's why it's coming out of his mouth. That's my assessment.
Also, apparently, JMD is wondering if you want him in, but I'm thinking that that would cause screen issues, maybe.
Yeah, it would be hard to do mid-show with if we open up a new box, it'll scramble the pictures. But I would love to have JMD on in the future, like a terrific guy. My hope is that atheists would see. By the way, I highly suggest people, if you want a guy who's, I think, kind to atheists and tries to give a fervent intellectual case for Christianity, which I would say, like, give a thumbs up to, in the sense that, like, I'm a Christian, and I would say, yeah, I think he goes to professional level arguments, and that's one thing I appreciate about his channel. I'd encourage you to check it out, even if you don't agree. Wait, hold on a second. By the way, I'm sorry to all the speakers. Usually we announce this at the start. All of the links for the speakers right now are down in the description. I highly encourage you to check them out, because even if you don't agree with them, we've got Christians and atheists and all of the others, strange creatures in between watching. We're happy every one of you is here. I encourage you to check out each of the speakers' links, and the reason is, even if you don't agree, you can at least understand from their perspective, their own words, what their views are. And
yeah,
so
absolutely.
So I would highly encourage you to go check it out, see what kind of stuff they're putting out, and that way you can at least understand it, rather than, like I said, if you get a summary of the opposite side's view, it's not necessarily that it's a straw man, but you're not getting like the most robust case, because the summary is usually leaving out some of the supporting details for time's sake. So anyway, as you like kind of polish up your skills of critiquing the other side, it's good to read the other, or I should say experience the other side first person. So anyway, okay, back to the discussion. Thanks for your patience on that.
I'd also say, just to piggyback off of what you said, if you are looking at any atheists or theists who are content creators, look at their latest videos first, and then maybe go back and look at their first couple to see if their positions ever changed. That way, if you try to say that, oh, you said this, and it's something that they stopped saying like a year ago, for example, or 2 years ago, that way you don't end up falling into that trap of generalizing still, because yes, all of their opinions are on their channel, but a lot of content creators don't get rid of old content simply because they don't agree with it anymore. It shows whether or not they've grown. For instance, my views on morality changed from my first few episodes to now. The way I conduct myself in general has changed from those. I'm pretty sure Dan has also changed a bit since he started Truth Wanted, and I'm sure that Craig has as well, because he's had a bunch of different people on his channel.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I think that's actually great advice, is, you know, catching the most up-to-date stuff, and then you can kind of figure out where they are now. So, I'm kind of...
Well, and also in terms of steel-manning atheist positions as opposed to straw-manning, like someone like Suris, I watch a pretty good chunk of his videos, and Dan's show I try to watch almost all of it, actually, because they're both pretty good if you want to steel-man the atheist position, so that you're not basing your opinions of atheism off of the weakest, lamest atheists out there, but the best and the brightest. You know, that's really the way to do it. You should be watching, like, you know, the people out there who are really kind of sharp and on point and aren't hate-filled, you know, as opposed to
insert ones that are.
Yeah, there's not that many that I watch, actually, that are, I don't hate watch anymore. I used to a little, but I don't really like watch someone who's, you know, oh, I hate this channel so much, and just keep watching it. I don't know. I haven't in a long time.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, like if I wanted to find a good representation of a Christian to watch, I would probably go to JMD, or I'd go to Inspiring Philosophy. I would go to one of those channels where there's a more scholarly, even-handed, measured approach to topics. I would that faster than I would go to, say, the manatee. There's some people who know who I'm talking about.
I like that you guys like you recognize the spectrum of like skilledness in terms of like thinking and producing arguments and how persuasive they are. I'm curious. This is something I think about a lot. Do you think that there's any sort of correlation, or perhaps no correlation at all, between popularity of Christian apologists and the ones that are more skilled? In other words, do you think that the better the arguments the apologist makes, or philosopher makes, whatever the Christian makes, that the more popular or the bigger following they'll have? Or maybe you think vice versa? Or maybe you think there's no relationship?
That's a great question.
I don't think there's a relationship, because you have to remember that, like, as an example, the masses who believe in young Earth creationism, there's a lot of them in the United States. Kent Hovind, as an example, makes horrible arguments, and he's been making the same ones for 15 years. They haven't changed. You can find his slides from his sermons from decades ago, and it's the same argument that he makes now. He hasn't changed them, tailored them, done anything to them. They're not convincing. They're not good, but they are still touted by a good following of people. There are people in my family that still actually are fans of Ken, because I grew up in a school that was funded by the beginnings of the IFB, which is the organization that he's part of loosely. But then you've got somebody like William Lane Craig, who has more convincing arguments. The arguments are only for deism, mind you. They're not actually arguments for Christianity, but they are more convincing, at least towards getting you to a God belief. But I'd say that Craig is maybe equal in popularity to Hovind for the most part. A lot of people who know Hovind will know Craig, and maybe an equal amount of people will know one or the other. But one is certainly better at what they do than the other person. So I don't necessarily think that there's a real good correlation there, because that puts it on the audience to determine whether or not an argument is good. And most of your lay audience aren't going to understand that. If you showed somebody a Kent Hovind sermon, they might sit there and nod their head over and over again, because they've never cracked open a textbook on it to be able to properly refute the stuff that he says. Mm-hmm. You show somebody a William Lane Craig sermon, well, not a sermon, but maybe a debate, where he talks about the Kalam, and he'll bring it up point by point. And you have somebody that nods their heads and says, yes, that gets you to Christianity. And you go, okay, but the Kalam is a Muslim apologetic. And they're going to go, wait, what? Because they just don't know.
Mm-hmm. I would also say that some of the more interesting ones, the ones that I like to look at more closely, are people that most people don't even know of or don't know the arguments to. Like Alvin Plantinga is a great example of someone who does great scholarship. You ask the average person.
Except when he talks about tornadoes.
Yeah, well, there's that. But if you ask the average person who that is, even in some apologetics places, they might not even know. So you have a wide breadth of people that go back ages, decades and decades of books and speakers and things. And I agree with Suris, like I think what it is it's an appeal to certain kinds of groups. So Hovind is going to appeal to the young Earth crowd. William Lane Craig is going to appeal to the more, I don't know, philosophically minded crowd, people who consider themselves more adept on the academic stuff. People have different arguments for different audiences, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. But I do think it does explain the local levels of popularity for these people, because they do intersect, but they don't always. There are places where they're more favored than others,
Yeah. This is I'm excited to have gotten your opinions on this. Those are all interesting ideas, and I am even more excited to hear your ideas on these questions from the audience. So I think this is going to be fun. We got a good mix in here. And so, by the way, while I'm pulling these up, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Hopefully we'll have these debaters, or I should say speakers, on again. They're gentlemen, and it would be our honor to have them back on. So if you want a reminder of when we hopefully get to have them back on, hit the subscribe. And my hope is, like I said, by the way, Suris has extended an invite to me. If it's still open, Suris, for me to come on your channel and to talk about what you might call a revised contemporary version of Pascal's wager. Very exciting. Yeah.
I have no issue with that. It just depends on the format that you want to do. If you want to do a conversation format that's me and you, and we try to hash out whether we figure it's good or not, that's fine. Or if you wanted to come out on the Hammered Out podcast where it's more of a conversation, that's fine as well. Just depends on the format you'd prefer. Just let me know.
Yeah, I'd be thrilled to do it. It'd be a lot of fun. So
I'll check that out.
Sorry I've been behind on that because but anyway, glad to have you all here. And Bud Askins asked the first question, which is, what role does the need to feel persecuted play in the dynamics between these two groups of people? That's a really good question. So, in other words, like, I think each group sometimes will say, hey, we're being victimized by you. You guys are so mean to us. And they kind of pull up a lot of cases of, because, yeah, that's true. There are cases where each side is mean to the other. And they'll kind of like pull it up and hang it in front of everybody's face and say, look. So the question again is, what role does the need to feel persecuted play in the dynamics between these two groups of people?
I guess it just depends on your narrative that you're going with. So, for instance, for an atheist, there's going to be the historical narrative of atheists have routinely been persecuted throughout the years just because they're not the majority. And whenever you're a minority group, you do get persecuted. It's just a fact of the matter. But on the flip side of that, if you're talking about Christianity, persecution narrative is actually an integral part of several of the Gospels. Jesus being persecuted by the Romans and subsequently his own people is a very big narrative thing. Paul being persecuted, Peter being crucified upside down. The persecution narrative is part of that story. So for both sides, I would say that there's definitely arguments. In one, it's an entire part of the culture and the actual narrative that persecution is something that happens. And in the other, there's a historical context, like with atheists. They've had to deal with, and not just atheists, but a lot of religious nons, because I do make a distinction there. There are a lot of religious nons or people who just weren't Christians who had to suffer at the hands of various inquisitions during the Crusades. People had to suffer in the United States during things like, we've had witch trials here. And even here recently, homosexuals just recently got the right to marry. Even Christian homosexuals recently got that right. So there's definitely persecution on both sides. I don't think any one side should say that they are more or less persecuted, because I don't think it matters much. If you're persecuted a lot, it doesn't make you more right or less right.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, anybody else? I thought it was a great question.
I personally think that I'm the persecuted church. I myself, I've been persecuted on Twitter constantly. I only have 3,000 followers. Or I don't even have 3,000 followers. Persecution, plain and simple.
If you've got 3,000 followers, you got more followers than I do, Craig.
Yeah, but you have this huge YouTube channel that's exploding. I've got I think 150 subscribers or something. Some sad number. some pathetic. So no, you're not persecuted. You're on your way to becoming king of the atheists, Suris. Everybody knows that. You're the leader. Matt Dillahunty, watch your back, because this kid's on the rise and he's gunning for you. No, I thought that he meant the question more colloquially, yeah, we both have our squads that play on. I thought he meant as modern day, I see Christians doing it all the time, where we try to play act persecution, to try. It's a political ploy in today's world. Neither side is being persecuted in any classic sense, of times of old. Back in, as early as the 1800s, it was illegal to be an atheist in most states. It may still technically be illegal, so you guys better watch out. I think it is technically still illegal some places to be an atheist, but
in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, it actually still is. I know that's outside of the United States, but I have friends in both of those countries.
Well, there were trials in the 1800s in England and the United States. It was, I don't know. I'm just talking off the top of my head, but I don't think anybody's being persecuted here for real. But both sides like to play up the persecution narrative to try and score political points. Christians have become really good at it. As a matter of fact, we're sort of nailing it down when we cry persecution over everything that happens. So that's all I'll say.
Well, I mean, to play devil's advocate here, let's think about this. I mean, if every Sunday there was a group out there of people who talked about how bad Black people were or something, we would say that that's a kind of persecution. And yet every Sunday there's a church somewhere that's talking about how atheists are bad people. You know, it may not be the same church every time, but it's going out there. And if we're looking at statistics in this country, we are, like, to a sense, still a minority. If you look at Congress, we officially have more Muslim representation in Congress than we do atheists. That's not to say that some people are actually atheists and they don't openly say it. That's a whole other thing. But, you know, it's tons and tons of Christians that are running for office and always happen. And in fact, in the state of Texas, there is still a law that, I mean, it's never actually been challenged, but there's several states that say that atheists can't even run for office. And there are people who have brought up those old laws when atheists have run for office and kind of challenged that. So I'm not saying that this is a completely widespread or that it's this huge entire problem, but I will contend to the fact that it still definitely does exist. And it's still definitely out there. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen to Christians in other countries. In fact, the point has brought up a lot in China, what's been going on with the Christians over there. I think that there's some real persecution there going on as well. But to say that it's not happening or it just doesn't exist, I think that's, I don't think that's as accurate as it could be. I do think it happens. I just think we're so used to it now. It's so accepted that it's kind of hard to recognize that sometimes. Maybe Suris disagrees with me on this, but.
No, it depends on which country you're looking at. Like, for instance, in a lot of predominant Muslim countries, Christianity is persecuted there a lot, but it's masked under this layer of you can legally be a Christian, but they are treated as second-class citizens. And if they want to run a business, I think it's called the Shiza tax. I can't remember. There's a tax they have to pay to run a business if they're Christian or if they're Jew, simply because they are. Now, it might be outright illegal to be an atheist in some of those countries. It can be jail time, can be execution, but it doesn't change the fact, like I've argued sometimes, that there's no small tragedies. It doesn't change the fact that, yeah, you might have it a little better if you're a Christian there, but you're still no less a persecuted party there. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're a second-class citizen. And it sucks. I wish that wasn't the case. Nigeria is weird about that. Top 12 states, all Muslim. Top 14 states, all Christian. And the laws change based on which state you're in as a result. So yeah, who is more or less persecuted is just a matter of geography. But I think, again, like I said before, the only thing that really matters at the end there is which one, if you can have them getting along. You don't necessarily need to have one more or less persecuted or need to have some type of reparations to one or the other. Just make the law to where everybody's okay, and then just continue forward.
I could use reparations.
I've been on your channel twice, Craig. What more reparations do you want? Money,
Serious, the money. You're selling T-shirts, right? Okay, reparations. The person you came on my channel to persecute me. That's the point. You persecuted the whole time.
Somebody say something about how the rich man won't go to heaven or something. I thought I heard that somewhere. But
yeah, they're not talking about me personally. They're talking about atheists, rich atheists. A lot of money in atheism these days. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Jesus Garcia asks, ask any of these guys if they are familiar with Dr. James White.
I'm familiar with James White, but I'm not familiar with a Dr. James White.
Is he the guy on? He's. I think I've been seeing him more recently. Is he the televangelist guy on Twitter that has been talking about the seed and like how you need to plant the seed and stuff like that?
I think it might be a different one. James White's more of a theologian.
Yeah, he's a presuppositional theologian. He had his bachelor's. He has accredited. He has accredited scholarly work, but accredited scholarship and non-accredited scholarship. This is why I won't call him a doctor. I refuse. I refuse to call Kent Hovind a doctor for the same reason. He's not. He's got an actual bachelor's from Grand Canyon University. That's true. He's earned that. I'm not going to take that away from him. But he has a master's from Fuller Theological Seminary and a THD from Columbia Evangelical Seminary. However, the colleges that he got his, at least the one that he got his PhD from, is not an accredited college. It's an online unaccredited college. So that means that by definition, you don't earn the title doctor. It's not a thing you can have without being accredited. He is, however, and if he didn't think this was the case, if he didn't think this was a problem, he wouldn't also be going and earning a PhD at the Northwest University. Once he earns that PhD, then I have no problem calling him by his honorific. But until he's earned the honorific, I don't call him by that.
You got it. And Craig, you're the only one that didn't speak. Have you heard of him?
I know the name. I don't know that much about him. What Suris said. I agree with Suris.
Yeah, I just looked him up.
I'm not going to call him doctor. There's all this stuff that Suris said, so I'm not calling him doctor either.
You got it. We got
He's debated Bart Ehrman before, which would be a good debate to watch.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
He's debated Bart Ehrman and Robert Price are two of the ones that you might know of.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So you've Rich Howard asked a good question. I think you guys are gonna really like this one. What are their views on movies like God's Not Dead that seem to paint atheists as God haters rather than genuine skeptics?
I have no issue with a movie wanting to paint an atheist that way, because I recognize there's also secular movies that will paint Christians the same way. If you want to make a movie villain and you want to make them the other, then that's fine, because you can have your complex villains like your Thanos. Thanos, for anybody who's familiar, Thanos in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and Thanos in the comics are two completely different villains. The Cinematic Universe one is your well thought out, your good representation. You might even like have breakfast with this type of person villain without knowing that they're actually a villain. And then your one from the comic books is your more Saturday morning cartoon, evil laughter, does things just because it's bad. Same character portrayed two different ways. I have no problem with either one because there's merits in both. I grew up on Saturday morning cartoons. I like those kind of villains, but I also like your more thoughtful ones. So if you want to make an atheist as your Saturday morning cartoon villain, which is very much what happens in God's Not Dead, that's fine. I would say, though, that Pure Flix blows, they blow at cinematography. There's no interesting shot angles. The shot composition's bad. The script writing is meh. The actors are good. The actors do their jobs well, but the script writing is bad and the cinematography is absolutely atrocious. So if they would improve those, they'd actually have good movies.
Yeah, they're great to watch with friends over some drinks and have a good laugh.
Yeah, I figured. That's the sum total of their witness to the atheists. Atheists watch them as drinking games. Like every time someone says, something dumb, take a drink, or everybody sometimes. So I mean, I didn't see the Hercules is God's Not Dead, right? That was the Hercules is the guy in that?
Actor,
yeah.
I didn't see either of those two, but I tend to wince at those type of Christian movies, for the same reason. I mean, Sears has no problem with it, but I'm sure he's relatively rare amongst the atheist community to watch something like that and doesn't really have a problem with it. The rest of them probably get all tripped out.
That's not what real atheists are like.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you bring up your example of Carrie.
I bet you there's a whole 10-hour, Twitter storm over that somewhere, or 50 somewhere or another. But, I'm not sure if it would serve Christians better. I never saw the movie, so I can't comment, but I can take a guess that it's probably pretty lame and pretty poorly boxed out. Those movies... Go ahead, sorry.
If you've seen... So, Craig, you've seen a number of debates. You were the one who directed me to watch the Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris discussion.
Yes,
this is
excellent.
Right up your alley. Okay, so have you ever actually seen a debate between two people that largely consisted of them yelling the definitions of words at each other until one ran out?
I can't say that I have. No, I haven't. No, probably no.
That's a scene in that movie. That is the debate scene in that movie.
Yeah, and the point is, it's not necessarily a good witness. He's a decent actor. They should work on these scripts and try and make them more skillful. Even a movie that's about a debate that's underlying. There's decent movies. There was one movie I watched called The Quarrel, which was about Orthodox Judaism versus secular Judaism. And the only framing device was the guy was in the Holocaust. and they were either brothers or cousins. One of them was an Orthodox Jew, the other is a secular Jew. And the whole movie is a debate, but it's pretty good. It's actually pretty intellectual about, you know, the one guy is trying to argue that the world is too corrupt and evil, so he remains an Orthodox Jew. And the other guy is trying to argue the point of secularism. You can be skillful and still do a polemic or still do a, you know, it's just so far it hasn't been done, as far as I know, in any meaningful way in any of the Christian films. You know, Dead Man Walking, most people don't consider it a Christian film, but it kind of is. The whole point of the movie is just trying to bring him to the Lord. What's his face?
I brought up Signs earlier, which again, that's another movie that is about a guy who lost his faith and then found a way to come back to his faith. Even though it's predominantly an alien film, that's a film with a decent Christian narrative. It's not horrible.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll put it in Christian. I'll put it in the category of Christian cinema. I'm down with that.
Really interesting.
But it sounds more skillful. Skillful is what we need. We need skillful Christian movies. John Buck, if you're listening, get it together. We're trying to write screensplays.
Well, okay,
get it together.
It's hard because the more skillful movies you have means you have to have the more interesting takes on Christianity, and sometimes more interesting takes on Christianity aren't necessarily the mainstream, and that kind of challenges people's views, and eventually you end up in a lot more trouble than it's worth to kind of go against the grain. I'm thinking of The Shack. I don't know if you ever saw The Shack.
I didn't, but that guy who worked on it was my preacher. One of the guys involved in that was a preacher at the Edge where I used to go to church. But I lost touch with him a long time ago. Go ahead, sorry.
There was just a lot of controversy when the movie came out because of the kind of theological implications. And there was a scene where there's a guy who's literally running with Jesus on top of the water. It's kind of goofy. It's not, you know. It's supposed to be kind of an awe-inspiring moment, but
did you play drinking games to it? Tell the truth. Or were you a Christian at this point?
I was still a Christian when I watched that movie.
Okay.
That's a fact.
And it made you an atheist. Look. Now you're an atheist.
I do think pure flicks actually probably links on atheism.
Even when I was a Christian, Craig, I knew that Christian movies were bad. Like, I think that was pretty accepted.
Well,
yeah, that's pretty standard issue. Even Christians know. They were like embarrassed for. Like, we go to them. My wife sometimes tries to drag me to them and pretend they're good because she wants to be a teen. You know, she wants to go for the team. But even she will own up.
Anytime somebody says that a Pure Flix film, because I think there's like one that was actually okay. I don't remember which one it is, but there's one Pure Flix film that actually has decent cinematography. But everybody that says that like a Pure Flix film is good, typically I will find in their movie collection something like 50 Shades of Grey, and I'm just like, oh, so the problem is you have horrible taste. Got it.
Right.
That solved that. And I'm not saying that as just a joke. I'm saying that because that was at my parents' place.
Well,
really? Wow.
I was when me and Pam were living with them for a little bit before we got our own place. I was cleaning the entire house, and I found a copy of 50 Shades of Grey, and I just like wrote on a sticky note. I was tempted to throw this in the garbage since you said to throw away all the trash, and I just put it on the on the movie.
That's funny. Well, now that you guys have insulted all of my favorite movies, I will go over to. I'm kidding, but the common sense guy, he asked if they look for their own tribes as atheists with atheists and religious with their own religion. I want to make sure I understand that. Maybe
ask that one more. Ask that.
Yeah,
one.
I don't get it.
Please reread that.
Ask if the speakers look for their own tribes as atheists with atheists and religious with their own religion.
So the first problem there is a category error. Atheism has nothing to do with religion. Theism also has nothing to do with religion. There are atheistic religions and there are theists who are non-religious. God claim and religion are not the same thing. So it sounds like the person is malforming the question not because they want to, but because they don't understand the subject matter that they're actually trying to talk about. I could be wrong, but anytime somebody says atheism is a religion, I'm just like, okay, not only is it not a religion based on the merit of them not having a belief but you can have Buddhists who are atheists. So of course, yeah, you can have religious atheists. But for two, you don't seem to understand what these things are. It's the same thing like when somebody says evolution's just a theory. I'm just like, oh, so you just don't understand what you're talking about. Neat. We'll just continue on.
Okay. Well, I think they weren't trying to. If I might have read it wrong, like I might have said it wrong. I think they were saying ask if they look for their own tribes as atheists with atheists and religious with their own religion. Oh, okay. I see why you'd interpret it that way.
So are they just saying that people like atheists look for other atheists and they look for religious people to be with other religious people?
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I
but
don't understand the question.
Who doesn't do that? I mean, like, it seems like kind of a natural thing to do. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm hanging out with all of you guys, and this is a pretty mixed crowd. Frankly, I don't have the choice to just, like, not hang out with Christians ever, because there's just so many people in my life who are like that. So
You
it wouldn't be...
live in America.
Yeah, well, Texas. So, yeah.
It's really interesting. Okay, so yeah, I think it is. They're asking, like, do you hang out with people of your own worldview? Generally, I do. I think most people do, and I don't think there's really anything wrong with it.
I don't actually.
As long as you're. Oh, go on, Craig. Sorry.
I don't. Most of my on Twitter, I do. Actually, most of the people I hang out with Twitter on are atheists. To be quite honest with you, I mean, about 50-50 on Twitter, Christians and atheists. But in the real world, all my friends from back east, none of them are really Christians. If they are, they're nominally, like they go to church at Christmas, you know. So no, most of the people I hang out with, I don't really necessarily hang out with them anymore, but I interact with them all the time on, you know, chat groups and Facebook and things like that. So no, in the real world, I don't hang out with very many Christians. Every once in a while, we'll go out to dinner with Christians, but not frequently.
You got to find community, bud. You know,
well, I'm married, so I'm totally fine.
I mean, I have. Luckily, I live in the Atlanta area, so for me, community is just finding the nearest place to go gaming. There's actually a gaming bar here called Battle and Brew, so you just go down there and you can have drinks and play Smash Brothers at a bar. Like that's
sounds nice.
But of course, I'd go there and just eat the food because the food's good. I don't actually shrink, but. I think for me, it's I kind of had a mixed bag. Everybody that I grew up with was predominantly Christian because I grew up in a Christian private school. And like some of my friends deconverted over time, but some of them are even still young Earth creationists. And then of course all of my family are still Christian, except for some people on my dad's side. But then when you go to the online stuff, a lot of my friends on here are atheists, like Dan, Godless Cranium. Like a lot of you guys are atheists, but then there's also people like Craig and SJ and James. And I consider myself at least friendly with all of you, if not friends.
Yeah, same with me. That's what I meant. I hang out with a lot of atheists online, who I consider my friends, to be quite honest.
And there's also, like, if I were to have to list all of my friends on
Except Dan.
Except Dan? Oh, well,
yeah.
Sucks to be Dan.
Where's the love, Craig?
Well, it's in heaven, so you'll get it after you die.
Yeah, amen. Amen. Keep praying. Keep praying, Dan. Keep believing.
So
I'm never going back to Christianity.
Even though most of my friends are, at least here in the online community, a lot of them are atheist. I have people on my Discord who I consider friends who are any mixture of atheist, pagan, Christian, anything. There's a predominance of atheism there. But I try to avoid it. Like, I actively try to avoid echo chambers where I can. So maybe I'm just a minority there, but that might not be the case.
Well, he actually, he chimed in, he let me know, he said, that's not the question. I was suggesting that atheists form their tribes and fit themselves into... But religious people will find others that are similar. So I think that
I'm with Suris. I don't try to hang out with echo chambers. I'm totally with Suris on that. I kind of like, but talking to and interacting with people who have different worldviews. I always have, and I do it fairly frequently and pretty easily. So I don't really seek out religious people to talk about like how great God's Not Dead was. You know, I really don't. I go to church and I interact with them, sort of, but I do a lot of socializing online, and I seek out people who don't agree with me often, or who aren't like me. That's interesting to me. It's fun.
I like that, Craig. But if you insult Kevin Sorbo one more time, you are off of this channel. So
I didn't insult him. He's good.
I'm kidding.
Good.
I'm kidding. I get it. I do like watching Kevin Sorbo for some reason. You can insult him. It's okay. But like, I do love watching. Okay. Thanks for your question, the common sense guy. He's got another one. He says, please ask if this other thing that occurs between these groups stems from prejudice, either from their own experiences or by others' opinions. So I think he's saying, like, if the conflict that occurs between groups is a result of prejudice.
I mean, it certainly would be. I mean, that's kind of part of compiling a schema of an individual or of a group, is that it's by every definition, it's prejudging based on a small set of criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. The conflicts come from prejudice. Any conflict I've had online, and I don't have that many, but I used to, a few when I first started on Twitter, any conflict was somebody automatically assuming that I had certain beliefs because I was Christian and jumping the gun on, not listening to me and jumping. And, you know, if you don't do that, you tend to get along with people. It's not really that hard if you're not looking to bust their chops or presume that they're, you know, this person's an atheist, therefore they're like X. You know, if you just wait and hang out and see what they're actually like, it's a lot easier in terms of it's you don't tend to get in conflicts.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. I think they're definitely. I think when I was younger, and there's evidence in psychology that people, as they get older, become more agreeable. You know, they kind of realize, and this is just on average. So I'm not saying that all people that are younger are less agreeable, but I know that for me it was true that I was much more prone to, like, I'm gonna come in and beat you in a debate when I was younger, and now I'm just kind of like, I don't know, like, say what you want, like, I don't know, I just
that was me of a year ago. Literally just a year ago, that was me, of the whole like debate me bro attitude. And then I got older, I'm like, I've actually had a few debates now. They're neat.
Yeah, you're young. That's the angry young man thing. You're young, you're charged up, you want to set the world on fire. You're like, come on, I'm going to prove I'm the smartest.
Yeah,
I'm the smartest. And then, yeah, that is actually maturing, you know. I'm not saying that Suris is mature, but maybe he's matured a little from last year. Now he's more like laid back and, you know, easy going.
Craig, it couldn't be the angry young man thing if you still feel that way.
What, because I'm an angry old man? Is that what you say? Oh, wow. Hey, you kids, get off my lawn.
Get off my lawn.
Angry old man. Wow, that's sad. That's sorry. Wow.
It only gets worse as you get older.
The anger or the bitterness, or which?
Just the old man part.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that does tend to intensify.
Craig knew that bitterness was part of the equation. I wonder where he got that insight from.
If you can manage to get to the point where you can fix the getting older as you get older thing, then let me know, because I would love to live for a few hundred years as opposed to like the meager 80-ish that we kind of get. That would be neat.
Become a biblical patriot.
We've got another one from Bud Askins, which is, thanks for that question, by the way, Common Sense Guy, and thank you for your answers from the speakers. And Bud Askins has one, namely, what would bring these two groups together more? 100% proof of a creator or 100% proof of no creator?
100% proof of a creator would do it faster. I'm going to be honest with you, and here's why. So, while there will be still some atheists that are going to be like so hyper skeptical that they can't move, there's apologetics out there for deities that are logically contradictory. So even demonstrating that something wouldn't exist in this reality, there are people that still believe that gung-ho. I think it would be faster to convince the skeptical crowd with evidence than it would be to convince the I wouldn't say non-skeptical crowd. It would be faster to convince the religious crowd be faster to convince the atheistic crowd with evidence than it would be faster to convince the religious crowd with a lack of evidence.
Good answer. Good. I tend to agree with that. I've said this before. I think I even said this on Dan's Truth Wanted show. If there was such a thing as a rock solid logical proof that didn't have flaws, or not to debate it, but flaws or potential flaws in it, and you presented it to most of the atheists I know, these two right here, Drew for sure, probably Steve McRae, a couple others, and you presented a rock solid proof, yeah, they'd resist it at first, maybe for a month at most, and then they'd think about it and they'd be like, you know what, I gotta, maybe I'm not gonna be, they wouldn't necessarily become a Christian, but they would yield if it were, if something were a lot of, there's a core of maybe I would say 50% of atheists who are completely reasonable enough that they would yield almost immediately if it were proved in a way that they were satisfied, intellectually satisfied. Just a hunch. That's just what I think.
As evidence of that, just to say that it's not just me and Craig talking out of our butts, as evidence of that, the young Earth creation crowd exists, and yet we have evidence that most of the things that they say are true are actually not, and those are things that we actually can prove one way or another, whereas like the existence of a deity that may or may not be in this dimension, whether you can prove that or not is really up for debate. I don't think you really can, because you're limited by the scope of what your own dimension is, but when you can show that something happened a certain way to our Earth in real life, beyond the shadow of doubt, and there's still a group of people that completely resist that on religious means, I think it is harder to convince that crowd. Sometimes.
And thank you for saying that, but I was talking out of my butt. Go ahead, Dan. I really was. But go ahead, Dan. Tell us the truth, Dan. What Truth Wanted, Dan? Come on, hook us up.
I don't know. That's an interesting question.
It really is.
I think I was going to argue the opposite, but I think Suris has convinced me. I think
he does that, man. He's good like that.
Here's a counterpoint, because if we're talking about 100% proof of a God, are we going to have debates on what that God is and how he's defined and what he wants us to do?
That might not necessarily need to be the case, because I think it was phrased originally that it was 100% proof that a God exists, not that it's the Christian God or any particular type of God.
Okay.
Right, which would unite people faster.
Sorry, I'm losing connection here. If it's the case that it's a specific one, very specific one, like the Christian God, for example, then I think you're right. I think it would be faster. If it's just like, oh, it's out there, then I think it would tear people apart.
You've just got the issue of the Middle East, but everywhere now.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Super.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's an interesting insight. So it's always a pleasure. And if you're an atheist out there, I know a lot of you are, I've seen some of you guys share about it in the comments. We're glad you're here. We consider you a friend, so we're glad to get to spend time. And also, I want to say thank you so much to our guests. Their links are in the description, folks. Even like I said, hey, if you agree with them, then obviously you'd see why you'd click on their link. But if you don't agree, you still have a reason, because you can, hey, maybe even in addition to learning straight from them in terms of what they believe, being a good listener, you might even at some point become a friend with them. That's my hope. So want to say again, thank you for the speakers. Totally encouraged to have you guys here. Thank you guys for your cordial personalities as well as your ideas. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, this was great. This was fun.
So with that, thank you for your questions. We totally appreciate it. I hope you guys have a tremendous night. And with that, yeah, we're just glad to have you here and call you a friend. So keep sifting out the reasonable from the unreasonable. Have a great night, everybody.